And then I will, so great. A little bit of great. So this, as I said, this is the opening in a 3-part series where we're really thrilled to welcome Chris Miller from New Paradigm Design Workshop, Greg Norton from La Measure, and Andrew Ashe from AMP Studios. Next week, we have Roseanne Haggerty with Community Solutions and Jess Valero from the People's Housing Coalition. And the following week, we have John Anderson from Tri-Cities Building and Land. We anticipate that this micro study and this series and this design competition will open dialogue on the feasibility and affordability and constructability of increasing density throughout the city, taking advantage of existing vacant spaces and tapping into the building technologies, sustainable methods, and diverse building typologies for the build out of accessory dwelling units, or the lovely term ADUs. What's most important is that design matters. And so we're thrilled to have this local talent today talking about exceptional projects. The Complete City is a PSA signature program entering its 4th year. We started with Mapping Portland, then the Complete City Imagined, which is actually still on exhibit at Peloton Labs if you haven't seen it. Last year, in response to social injustice, we launched the Complete City Disconnected, which is still ongoing. And now we're in the next few weeks, we're launching Filled In. This is run by committee, most of whom are on this call, and I'd like to recognize them. Alyssa Panadistak is our PSA board president and an architect with SMRT. Danielle Fouassi is our PSA secretary and an architect with Kaplan Thompson. Ben Bailey, also with Kaplan Thompson. Kara Biondi, also with Kaplan Thompson. Russ Tyson with Witten Architects. Patrick Costin from Canal 5. And Chris Miller, who's also a PSA board member and speaker today. I'd like to also thank our underwriter, benefactors, sponsors, supporters, and friends, for which none of this could have happened. Okay, Chris, we can actually turn that screen off and we can see everybody just for now. Thank you very much. During this presentation, please keep yourself on mute. For best viewing, choose the speaker view in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom dashboard. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end. There are a number of folks on this, but we all know one another, we all like one another, and we all want to hear what we have to say. So if you feel like your question can't be answered right away, you can also type it in the chat, and that's fine, and I'll be monitoring that. As we imagine our physical environments, land use, and the ground on which all of this is potentially developed, I'd like us to pause in remembrance and pay respect to the tribes of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseet, and the Micmac peoples. With respect for the tradition of these indigenous people, we affirm their inherent sovereignty in this territory, and we are hopeful for healing. And with this, we commit to the ongoing work of decolonization. Thank you. So here we go. Chris Miller, a principal with New Paradigm Design Workshop, will kick off our talk with an entertaining and informative history of the accessory dwelling unit in the Manor way. Then we'll have Andrew Ashe of AMP Studio, a recent transplant to Portland from Los Angeles. And we're thrilled to learn more about his work here, as well as from LA and elsewhere. And he's thrilled to get to know more about our local design community. So welcome, Andrew. And Greg Norton with La Measure, who has the most personal clients in his telling of the ADU build out in South Portland. And with that, thank you very much. And you're ready to go.
All right. Here goes. I'm going to share my whole screen and full screen. All right. So this is a presentation that I've given a couple times now, and this image is it's a useful sort of prop for defining what an ADU is. So what is an ADU? Why do we call it that? I'm not going to answer that second question, but if anybody has better names for what an ADU, put it in the chat. I think we need some. So this is a picture of Monhegan in the 1940s by Sears Gallagher, and it's a nice picture. It's pastoral. It's If you look at the buildings, you can see in the center background, there's a little outbuilding in front of those pine trees. And a lot of them have plenty of interior space. They all have second stories and mostly habitable looking attics. Off to the far right-hand side, you see a little addition or a bump out with a chimney poking out. And so if you keep those in your mind, this standard definition of the accessory dwelling unit often uses a similar diagram, not nearly as nice, but I'll read the standard definition, even though it's outdated. According to the American Planning Association, an ADU is a smaller, independent residential dwelling unit, so otherwise known as private kitchen, private bath, sleeping area, which is on the same lot as another usually standalone single-family home. So from the get-go, an ADU isn't really a type of building at all. It's more like a legal definition about who can live there. And it's also worth saying that almost none of that definition is true in Portland. As of this year, with the recode, you can build up to 2 ADUs on any legal residential lot in the city of Portland, which is to say not just on a single family zone and not just on a multifamily or a mixed use zone. And if you can find the space and if you can meet the city's rules and requirements, which may be easier said than done in a lot of cases, you can build up to 2 cottages and or apartments, and you can move yourself in, your mom and dad in, you can rent them out. And that sort of in a way harkens back to a time like 100 years ago and beyond, before we had modern zoning and land use rules. So at that point, historically, what we today are obliged to call an ADU would have been a pretty, let's say, commonplace and maybe unremarkable thing. So if you find them in old photographs, it'll be by reading the captions, where, like in this case, this is a homestead, I guess you'd call it, on Great Cranberry in 1895, where the owner built an attic apartment for his boat builders. This postcard from Midcoast in 1908 is another example. So in the postcard, you see, 3 gray buildings, a nice fluffy cloudy sky. But the caption says something really interesting. It says that the owners of this place, like most homeowners in their area, took in summer boarders. So those 2 examples sort of do a pretty good job of illustrating what like the potential benefits of ADUs and what they are in their essence as well, which is sort of I suppose you'd say, an unusually resilient and adaptable and direct way of communities meeting their own housing needs. They're really great for socioeconomic diversity because they create smallish rental units in single family residential zones. And they're also interesting because they're sometimes used as adaptive preservation tools, which is just to say that they can often hide in plain sight. They don't always, but they can just blend into the landscape. So the other interesting thing to know about these is that they were illegal for most of the 20th century in most places. The highlighted line here, I guess it brings up Canada. So in Canada, something interesting happened after World War II. What happened during World War II was that the Canadian government suspended single-family zoning rules entirely for the war effort. They had a bunch of rural people coming into urban areas to fill factory jobs, and they just decided to let local people house them in any way that people could agree upon. Then after the war effort, they tried to reinstate single-family zoning, and basically everyone ignored it. So if you want to make something really popular, if you want to get a lot of ADUs built, the lesson here is that you make something popular first and then you make it illegal. So throughout the 40s and 80s, Canadians, especially in Western Canada, developed thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of illegal backyard cottages and basement apartments. And that is why Vancouver is known as the ADU capital of the world. It wasn't that people built thousands and thousands of legal ADUs. It was actually that they built illegal apartments. And Vancouver was the first city, I think, in the world to institute a widespread amnesty program. So they sort of realized their problem and that these illegal apartments were meeting a need. And In some cases, they even provided grants and forgivable loans to bring these places up to code. So I think for decades, Vancouver's had a very permissive ordinance for ADUs, as they're called here. They don't have a lot of setbacks, don't have any density limits. I'm not even sure about the ownership requirements, but it stands in contrast to another city in the Pacific Northwest. Not to criticize too much, but if there's a way not to do an ADU ordinance, look at Seattle. They've had an ordinance on the books for 25 years, but for the first 20, it was pretty underutilized and very restrictive. If you look at some of these photos down below, you can sort of see, I guess, because of setbacks and lot coverage restrictions, some of these places look, with weird step backs, weird overhangs, a little backed into awkward corners. And Seattle's older ADU rules are similar in many ways to most of Maine's, which is to say that, this is a 10-year-old snapshot of towns and cities in Maine with ADU regulations. There are about 24, maybe 30. As soon as you update this graphic, it's out of date because it's constantly changing. But what we know about these ordinances is that no two are very much alike, and they're all much more like Seattle's than like Vancouver's. So the state of California was almost exactly the same way until 2016. In 2016, something interesting happened. Their state legislature passed a law that overruled all local zoning ordinances for ADUs and them uniformly in every town and city in California. So that idea caught on pretty quickly. So in 2015, you could say that ADUs were, technically allowed, but really a non-issue as far as actually getting built in California. And now, if you can believe all these published numbers, in 2019, actually, I'm not sure about now, but as of 2019, they were making up more than 10% of all the housing starts in the state, and it's a large state. So within California, Los Angeles is doing some very interesting things. Since the state law passed, ADUs have actually accounted for about 20% of the building permits pulled in Los Angeles annually. And so presumably because they were inundated, Los Angeles's permitting department started a registry for pre-permitted plans just this year. So I think they invited 14 architects, and there's 20 some standard plans that you can build on a day's permitting in Los Angeles. And I believe that the registry is open to anyone now. So all you architects in the audience, make a note. You can at least try to get something in Los Angeles's registry of pre-permitted ADU plans. So of course, pre-permitting an ADU also makes it a lot less expensive. All the developers, any developer you talk to can tell you that waiting a year for a permit is an expensive thing to do. And towns and cities that want to incentivize ADUs have come up with all sorts of different programs by which to do it. So there's expedited permitting, there's even clear and permissive zoning rules, just making it easy to figure out. That's a good way to encourage ADUs. A lot of cities in Canada, and even Boston, I believe, is offering, depending on the circumstance, forgivable loans, grants even, or no interest in the construction of ADUs that meet certain requirements for affordability. And small banks especially, not so much large banks, but small local banks are also doing some innovative things, sort of tailoring loans to jump the sort of hurdles that ADUs face. So it's an interesting project. It's an exemplary project because it's a rare kind of case in which the prospective owners of a residence have something to do with the way it's built and to do with developing it. That's something we're not like. Maine is a special place because we do so much of that. We have such a vibrant residential design sector, but all in all, it's pretty unusual and it's an interesting opportunity. So ADUs, how? These last couple slides are my favorite. Another way to ask that question is to think about the way that ADUs work, depending on where they are. Where they're very successful, they tend to be sort of tailored to the requirements of a region, of a place. So in New England, we know all about accessory building types, the home of the connected farm. We know all about incremental building types. I think all the architects in the audience probably have this book on their shelf. This is my favorite diagram from Thomas Hubka's Big House, Little House, Back House, Barn. It's about the L. So next time you see an L, you know, or 10 L's in the next 10 minutes, you can wonder, was it built first? Was it built second? Was it built at the same time? These two images always crack me up. I guess the short thing to say about this slide is that because we live in a coastal area, people know how to move big things on land and water. In Provincetown, over 100 years ago, they moved 30 homes on these little tiny barges with little tiny cranes across from a sandbar that was washing away into town. And 100 years later, you see that people are doing the same thing. So there are no new ideas. I'll leave basically that thought and a challenge. You know, we have a permissive new ADU ordinance and we should figure out how to use it the best way that we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Andrew, you are up.
Yep. Okay, just gonna share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay, I'm going to assume that's a yes. Okay, so I am Andrew Ashe. I'm principal of AMP Studio, which is an architecture practice located in Portland, as well as Toronto, Ontario. Many of you may not have heard of us because, as Addie mentioned at the beginning, we are relatively new to Portland. We relocated from Los Angeles about 2 years ago. So to give you just a brief snapshot of our studio, we, as I mentioned, we are architecture, but we also equally do interior design and brand identity, with the belief that they create kind of fully integrated spatial experiences, particularly when it comes to residential, when it comes to commercial and hospitality spaces. But that said, our work is split right down the middle, basically 50% residential, which you can see a handful of our projects here, as well as 50% kind of retail, commercial, bars and restaurants, office and TI, which is, we have projects kind of peppered around the country regarding these. But obviously I'm here to share some of our ADU projects. So I'm going to share 3 in particular. 2 are in the design phase and that they're at the latter part of design development. So they're kind of moving along in the process pretty well. And then one of which is in Yarmouth. And then the other is in LA, in the Hollywood Hills. And then the third one I'm going to share is one that we finished a couple of years ago that's also in Los Angeles. But got through the process, got through the permitting process, got through the bid process, was about to start construction. Unfortunately, did not start construction because the client decided to purchase another home instead, as it goes in architecture sometimes, but still thought it would be a fun project to share with you in context of the other 2. So what's interesting about these 3 projects when you look at them collectively is that you realize that, you know, no 2 projects are the same. There are many parameters that go into the design and execution of an ADU. One obviously is site context. So you can see these are the 3 sites of the 3 projects. One on the left is very urban, very dense housing. The one in the middle is a little bit more suburban. It's in the hills, larger lots, larger wooded lots. And the one on the right is more rural, which is Yarmouth. And the ADU itself is on a several acre lot. But what's also very interesting is you have parameters driven by, sorry, glass of water. You also have parameters that are driven by, excuse me, clients and zoning. Sorry, Addie, I just got something in my throat here.
Fine, we understand.
Sorry about that. So you have parameters of the site, of the context itself, the physical characteristics of the site, but then you also have parameters from the clients, the program, so what they actually want in the space, as well as zoning. So what's permitted on that site? What are the setbacks like? What's the density like? How much square footage can you add? So all of these things go into making basically an ADU that you don't really have a one size fits all solution, that every project is kind of unique, driven by its physical context, its permitting context, as well as the clients itself. So all that to say, this resulted in 3 very different ADUs of different sizes. So the one on the left in LA is only 200 square feet, driven by square footage requirements or limits, I should say. The one in the middle is 600 square feet, which was driven more by setbacks. And the one on the right in Yarmouth is 900 square feet, it's a little under 900 square feet, which is again, limited by the amount of square footage that an ADU can be within that municipality. So to start, the first project is the one we finished a couple years ago in the Koreatown neighborhood of Los Angeles. Again, a very dense neighborhood, which is full of a lot of single family homes, smaller bungalows on very small lots. So the interesting thing is here, it's a small home on a small lot, but it's fully built out, meaning we weren't allowed to add any more square footage to the site than was already there. So we were left with the small 200 square foot garage that was in the backyard. The city did allow us to use any existing structures as habitable space. So that gave us the opportunity to use this garage and then play with the backyard a little bit to make it feel a little bit larger. So you can see a site diagram here where we start to play with that backyard. The house is in the middle, obviously taking up quite a bit of the site. The garage, the ADU, is in the back corner. And what we did is essentially take the skeleton structure of the ADU and create kind of a mimic of it on the opposite side of the yard to create a larger spatial relationship with the ADU and the site itself, and create a kind of an interstitial space between the two that becomes a habitable space. So you can see here the skeletal structure of the ADU. It's basically a mimic, but it becomes a pergola and creates kind of a space between the two that essentially creates 3 separate, one indoor space and 2 kind of outdoor spaces. Sectionally, you can see that happening here. The very small footprint of the ADU can open up and extend out to become more living space on the exterior in warmer months. You can see the site plan here. We used the actual footprint of the ADU as sort of a stamp and put 3 copies of it around the backyard. The first one I mentioned is the pergola across the way, which is a shaded living and dining space, or outdoor living and dining space. And the third one sort of overlaps with the existing ADU to create more of an indoor-outdoor feel between the two, and is housed with a fire pit. It's all right, going back, you can see the ADU itself, since it's so small, is sort of the equivalent of a hotel room. It has a living space that can be converted into a sleeping quarters with a convertible sofa, and has a small kitchenette on the south side and a bathroom and shower on the right-hand side. You can see the kind of rendering of it here. Contextually, why I showed you the house in the beginning is, building these things, while they can be very different from the main house, often the client or even municipality wants them to feel somewhat similar. So we use the existing form of the garage, use the cladding, the same kind of clapboard siding that's used in the front of the house, but used a blue similar to the front house, but made it a little bit darker to stand a little bit separately. Inside, we use some tricks to help make it feel bigger because it is quite a small space. The main one being the cantina doors on the left-hand side, which fully open to embrace the outdoor space. Vaulted ceilings to make it feel a little bit larger. We paired an outdoor shower with an indoor shower just behind the fire pit to make the smaller shower feel a little bit larger. And then in the bathroom, at the back of the bathroom wall, we used a large mirror to help make the space feel much larger than it actually is, as well as some pocket doors that tuck away. So that's that project. Next project is also in Los Angeles, but again, as I mentioned, is currently in design. So design development, we're going to be going into the permitting process here pretty soon. Very unique situation up in the hills. Again, a little bit more suburban site. And again, for context, it's a Spanish style home on a very wooded lot with ironically an ADU already existing in the backyard. The problem here is it doesn't work programmatically for the clients. It's a single, it's a 1-bedroom ADU, and they want a 2-bedroom ADU. And it also has some structural and some mold issues. So rather than retrofit it, they decided to raise it and build a slightly larger ADU. The problem here, or the challenge I should say, is the setback requirements. You need 10 feet from the house for fire separation, as well as the rear and side yard setbacks. Left a very kind of interesting and challenging space left to build with. And you can see the footprint of the existing ADU doesn't even comply with the current, it's kind of grandfathered in at the moment. But it left a kind of challenging setback buildable area that we kind of found a fun solution of creating a perfect triangle ADU and putting the two bedrooms in 2 of the corners of the triangle and leaving the larger corner of the triangle for the the living and kitchenette space. The clients programmatically want this to be a very flexible space. So both of the bedrooms are convertible to offices. They have Murphy beds in them to fold down. And then the kitchen and living space can be converted and can be used as a gym as well. In terms of the site, it does take up the entire backyard. So this is an axonometric view of the roof deck. So they're capturing the space. They're making more outdoor space by making the top of the ADU occupiable. And in terms of context of the main house, it is that Spanish style house, which I mentioned, and the clients didn't want it to necessarily be a duplicate of the Spanish style house, but they wanted us to take cues. So with the terracotta roof of the existing house, the terracotta tile roof, we're using a terracotta tile clad around the perimeter of the ADU, as well as taking kind of the more rounded edges of the existing houses and letting that kind of soften the corners of the triangular plan and bring in some roundedness to the windows and the doors. And plan, I've sort of already talked about this, but you have the 2 bedrooms at the top and bottom. They're basically mirror images of each other with the Murphy beds that come down. Kitchenette to the south side, the gap that can be used for a bistro table or gym equipment as is shown in this plan, and a built-in sofa on the top. The roof plan, just some outdoor seating with a fire pit. And a snapshot of looking from the back of their house toward the ADU. Snapshot of the interior. So again, there's the kitchenette, you can fit a bistro table. They wanted to maximize some of the glazing in the house. And this also provides an opportunity for a place for their gym equipment, should they use it for this instead of dwelling at certain times. And the offices and bedrooms. So on the left-hand side, you can see a large built-in piece of millwork, which is a Murphy bed, which pulls down, but still keeps a spot for a desk and storage. Okay. So more locally, this project in Yarmouth is the biggest of the 3. So the last one was 600 square feet. The first one was 200 square feet. This one is just under 900, which is the limit for Yarmouth. But in terms of build out, in terms of the building, it's paired with an extension of a current home that does not have a garage. So the clients wanted a 2-car garage with an ADU above and a carport, an open air carport next to it. So it's essentially a 3-car garage below with an ADU above. Again, for context, the house, this is on a several acre lot in the woods of Yarmouth. And typical kind of, not typical, but traditional New England contemporary farmhouse, a couple years old at this point. But some of the challenges here, even though we have a big lot, are the slope, which has been basically the biggest challenge of the project, just kind of overcoming the slope with parked cars in the garage. But also the fact that the existing house, this is a site plan, the existing house is shown on the top right, is tucked very far up at the top of the hill and right in the corner of the setback of the buildable setback area. So the house needs, the ADU needs proximity to the house because of the cars. But it's kind of tucked so far up that we can't really put it next to it. But it did give us a wonderful opportunity to align the front of the ADU and garage with the back of the home to help give kind of more views, light and air to each of the occupants, because the ADU is above the garage. And it helps gives a little bit of privacy between the two units as well as creating kind of a nice little shared courtyard between the two for occasional interaction. So here we have an axon of the ADU. Formally, its pitch and slope of the roof are similar to the house. The size is actually very similar to the house, but it was very important to the clients that it did not feel like an extension of the house. They wanted it to feel separate, but they wanted to feel more like a barn. So much like their current house is speaking more to the New England farmhouse aesthetic, they wanted the addition of the ADU and garage to feel more like a New England barn, basically, but with kind of modern leanings. So what we did is, much like the traditional barns around, they're different in color from the main house, whether they're a red barn with a white house or a wood barn with a brick farmhouse. So to contrast the two materially was important, and then also making the openings much larger. So not letting the openings read like traditional houses, windows in a house, but really opening them up to become much larger, like the openings in a barn. And these are just quick snapshots from some of our design decks, but you can see on the back side it gets much larger because it slopes down, but it affords some opportunity for storage underneath parts of the garage. So in plan, just an enclosed 2-car garage next to the house, and the breezeway is to the right. And then an open air carport on the west side, farthest from the house. The carport is for the ADU and is a requirement of the ADU code that there be parking. And the entrance is off of the carport, the open air carport, and goes up to the unit above. You land sort of at a large dormer that overlooks the woods. Have a service core here with your kitchen and bathroom. On one side is the living and dining kitchen space with large doors that open up to the exterior, and then the bedroom to the far right on the opposite side. Sectionally, you can see we're kind of mitigating the landscape here, or the hill here. We have storage below the stair circulation, some storage at the garage, and then the unit above. A view just kind of on approach of the house. Again, those larger, we tried to pair openings. So the opening of the carport below, as well as the opening of the unit above, kind of make it one large opening so that it reads a little bit more like a barn, as well as pairing the two enclosed garage doors here, making them read like one garage door and popping up some larger dormers. So quickly walking you through, this is the entrance at the ground level off the carport. Going up to the large rear dormer. View of the interior. The clients really wanted it to feel open, light, and airy. We vaulted the ceilings, struck a datum across where the vault happens, and clad that in wood. Everything below is kept white, and again popped these larger dormers for more light and air, or light and air to cross through the space. Wraps around into the bedroom. And then just a little view of the dormer looking back into the living room space. And that's it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
And Greg, you're up.
All righty, I'll share my screen. Everyone can see this fine?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. So as Addie mentioned, this is a very personal project since this is the house I live in. My name is Gregory Norton. I work for LeMeasure's building envelope division here in South Portland. And this is a personal project of mine, just unaffiliated with LeMeasure. And I think the best way to talk about this project is just go through the basic timeline of this and start in the very simpler time of April 2019. Quick history of the house. It was built in 1930, I believe, by an Italian immigrant family. My grandmother-in-law actually bought the house from that same family in 1975, and then my parents-in-law bought it from her in 1995. So bottom left here, you can see a traditional Irish Catholic gathering in the kitchen. Found a nice picture of my spouse in the kitchen, and then one of her birthday parties in '95. And I just want to bring it up and just, you know, very traditional family. The graphic in the right is just depicting typical mortgage balance of the house. You know, again, born and bred in South Portland. And the situation that created this, you know, there was a family circumstance which kind of accelerated our plans into doing this. So my own family, we were growing. We were 4 of us in a smaller house in South Portland. And this house became a little too large, and just for upkeep and other circumstances for my parents-in-law to maintain. So in May 2019, we began conceptualizing this idea. You know, there's, you know, fiscal dominoes, there's the permitting, there's the design, building, builder interviews, all that had to align in a certain way. And it took a while to understand, you know, the logistics of that process. But essentially what happened is that we were able to buy the house. There was a profit margin for my in-laws. And the plan was for that profit margin to fund the building of the ADU. So essentially, via us buying the house, they could build their own addition in the back. And of course, we would help. And understanding some more of the nuances of a private sale, especially in family. So we were able to use a gift of equity as a down payment, which, as you all probably know, that was such a huge advantage for us with respect to the mortgage we were taking on and all that. But this caps lock bit here, we all had to live together during this process, which was a lot of fun. And it helped prepare me for COVID, actually, in hindsight. Really quickly, going over the design, very easy clients. So here's Nana, I just want my couch, TV, and coffee maker. Okay, that's easy enough. Papa just wants a big kitchen, bedroom, stairs, etc. And for us, the idea of this was to create essentially an age-in-place home for my in-laws, and as well as understand the needs that we would have as our family gets older. So we wanted to maximize the yard space, of course, because we had a very cramped site. So the slightly off 90-degree angle is intentional because the ADU is placed as far back as the setbacks allow. So the site that we have was a 20-foot offset from the back lot and 6 feet from the side. That was very challenging. However, we were able to maximize the legal footprint of the ADU at 800 square feet. And with respect to priorities of the ADU, it was space. So opposed to, you know, the wish of doing, you know, more materials, you know, more solar passive envelope sort of things, we just said, no, we're gonna just get the most space, make it simple, and prepare it in order for my in-laws to, you know, live there as long as they can. So for instance, there's a 42-inch stairwell, so it's lift ready, if you will. We decided to obviously to have minimal spaces to upkeep. So the ground floor is essentially just one big room. There's a little walk-in pantry and mechanical tucked under the stairs. And then the bathroom and bedroom is upstairs. We have a really good yard, in my opinion. So the way the sun travels across our yard is is nice because now the ADU, it gets morning light, but it doesn't really hit you till mid-morning, so it can stay somewhat dark. And as the sun goes across in the afternoon, the most of the design of this addition came with its windows and openings and things. So that was the driving element, with where sliding doors that were fully glazed and fixed openings that were large, to enable not only solar gain but have programmatic advantages. So say here's the couch with Happy Nana on the sofa drinking her coffee. So here's a view of the yard, which is also a double door, but also a view to the entry. So there is opportunity for who's ever in the ADU to see, the comings and goings of the driveway, as well as see who might be entering their space. But of course, this mass in the backyard hindered a little bit of daylight that came into our house. So via the code required breezeway, put a nice big fixed window and a double door. So as the sun comes across the yard, we didn't really sacrifice too much natural light that got to our dining room. So that was a large benefit of putting these, again, very simple design moves, but doing a lot for us. The process was a blur at this point, so it was kind of tough for me to pull back into my brain to figure out how it went. However, South Portland was very, very helpful in this whole thing. So we were able to find, the permit application. And I feel lucky enough to, I was a civil engineer in a previous life before getting into architecture. So kind of knew, where to look in zoning and how to look at a lot and all this stuff, and crunched the numbers to identify, what we were allowed to do, what we, could choose to do. And this is actually a good shot to see how that ADU is tucked to the the back corner of the yard to give us the most yard space. The one bummer, actually, in hindsight, was the requirement at the time. I don't know if it's changed, but to have 2 additional cars be able to park in the driveway with the ADU. And we were very lucky to just have this long driveway so it could work. But we had to demolish an existing garage because we were at the maximum lot, kind of building ratio for our property. But the kicker for us was that so I highlighted this other comment we had to do in the permit was, so, contingent upon the ADU permit approval, the in-laws will sell the property to us. Then after the sale, the proposed ADU in the application would house the in-laws. So we had to time the permit with the mortgage process with selling our old house, and it was just an absolute nightmare. So that's kind of why my face looks like that. That's I'm living with my in-laws and I'm stressed out face right there. The process, we had a great builder, and on their Instagram, I was able to pick some of the pictures. So here's that old garage, and I believe, being 1930s, it was actually sized to a Model T. So it was pretty, not a contemporary garage by any means, but it was, a sheltered space to store things. The second picture is prepping the site, and we had a radiant system because, again, thinking of the in-laws and the clients here, like to be warm is an understatement. So thinking that radiant would not only keep your feet warm, but having an uninsulated ceiling on the first floor, and being such a compartmentalized footprint, the radiant really does keep it warm, as evidenced by this last winter. And it's fairly energy efficient too, even though we just did the 6-inch stud walls and things. It's a Viessmann Vito Dens that powers the property. And again, it's like kind of a little townhouse. So downstairs you can see the sun coming through the double doors, and there's their own private bit of yard in the back. And did some solid surface countertops, and the kitchen again is somewhat oversized for the footprint, but again, that's something my father-in-law loves to do, and any cooking that he can do for me, wanted to make it happen. So here's the representation of how everything shook out. So again, the profit margin that the in-laws were able to get from the sale essentially funded the entire ADU. there's a little bit of an equity loan that we personally had to take to literally fill in the gaps at the tail end. But thank you, South Portland, and the timing of this was perfect, because now in theory we have a lot more equity than what we owe on the mortgage. So just the mutual benefit of this happening has not only kept the house in the family, but bringing up March 2020, we had the certificate of occupancy, I think literally the week where everything went crazy, in March of 2020. So during this past year, I bet you all can imagine, thinking of those with kids, how much of a benefit it has been for us to have that family available literally in the backyard as needed for two tempting full-time working parents here. Just briefly, lessons learned through this process. Number one, just open communication between the family. My mother-in-law says, "You're not going to sell this place and boot us to the curb, right?" It's like, no, that's part of our agreement. For us, it was finding local precedents. South Portland does a really good job of looking at the planning board. There's PDFs of applications, and I poured over those to try to get familiar with what to do and just be prepared in general. Research zoning and lot requirements, that's a necessity, especially for ADUs, that every single inch matters with respect to design. Start communication, build relationships with the city very early. So what we did was we had an idea what we wanted to do, we had the basics, and we went and met with the people in the city that were going to make the decisions for us. And we had a 2-month lead time for the planning board appointment. That was that video still that you saw, and that was actually accelerated. I've heard, this can be 3 or 4 months. So making sure you have everything in order and understanding lead times for these actions was very critical for us. The benefits of private sale I went over, and then of course talked to more than one builder. It was our third contractor we talked to, which was our match, and we couldn't have been happier with how everything went. So essentially we conceptualized this ADU in May of 2019 and got occupancy in March of 2020, which is kind of insane to think about how quick that went. It felt like 5 years, but I think we prepared ourselves well with what to do and when to do it, and aligning all the other moving parts. So yeah, here's us just this past fall, pizza night. And I brought up those pictures just as a way, this is the primary dwelling, but I think it's part of this whole journey here. So, you got the 80s, the 90s, and now the 20s. And we're making changes, as you can imagine, to the primary dwelling, but there are things in the house that are going to maintain and keep the soul alive, for lack of a better term. And we're excited to really get going. Of course, COVID screwed up a lot of our plans to do things on our own. But what's fun is spaces you didn't really anticipate to have any program, quote unquote. Like my daughters love the breezeway. It's unfinished. We're going to do something cool in there, but that's the place where it gets really good natural light. And so you get painting. Backyard on the hammock, just again maximizing the yard, and they're already getting used out of it. And it's been a good journey. It was very stressful, but at the same time, it's the benefit of the 3-generation house in this formalized ADU fashion has been great. It's all been worth it, and I just wanted to kind of give a nuts and bolts, somewhat plain build, but again, it's working out for all parties. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Chris. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We always have these events for an hour. I will ask of our guests if you're willing to give a little bit of extra time if there are more questions beyond the 7 minutes we have left. And with that, actually, I'm going to read out a question that Maggie Stanley wrote. Greg, who was your builder?
The builder was Codier Construction out of Scarborough. And I didn't really touch upon it much, but it was like a fill-in project for them. They do really nice, additions near Higgins and things like that. But this was a gap project, I think is how it was put. But there is such a void, in my opinion, for this this typology here. That the scale is not quite the biggest moneymaker for both the designer and the builder. The sites are really constrained. There's a lot of permitting. There's neighbors you got to invite to the planning board. So if there is a way to streamline this in some fashion, I think there's opportunity, tremendous opportunity for that to happen. But yeah, Codier Construction, they were great. And yes, we do share utilities. We wide off the water, and they essentially pay a very lower than market rent to us, and just the utility fee every month.
Well, you bring up a good point that I can almost throw out as to bait some interesting conversation, which is if, in Los Angeles, they have the pre-permitted process or the pre-permitted architects. There is a question and a range of, sort of a pre-built sort of plop, that you could just add on, that's almost a kit, or, sort of, again, that what Andrew showed in Los Angeles, very site specific, very design detailed. There seem to be two extremes here. And I think the real challenge in the riddle is how do you contextually design something that is typology appropriate? And the debate of, is your building beautiful? Is it, again, does it work? Does it match? Or is it really just filling a void or a policy or even this need? So there's a lot of conversation around this. And I would love to hear what all three of you think, but then others as well, please. And can everyone, I think you might have to ask me to unmute you if you want to speak. So just either raise your hand or try to unmute yourself too, if any of our guests. But all of Andrew and Greg.
Yeah, I'll just add that, I guess why I showed the three projects in the light that I did is to say that, all three are extremely site specific and client specific. If there's an opportunity where a site or a municipality allows for sort of more of a one size fits all approach, and that's the approach that a client wants to take, I think that's great. That there are certain avenues for a project that are, again, specific to each situation. So, but what we have found in the projects that we've worked on is that would not have worked in any of those sites. If it does happen to work in a site, that's great. But then also a client might want to, even if it does work in that site, the client might want to specify certain programmatic requirements of like flexibility or contextualization of their current house. So there are still design elements that need to go into it that maybe necessarily doesn't work for a one size fits all solution, but sometimes it does work. Sometimes you can bring on a prefabricated ADU and put it in your backyard with no kind of zoning issues or contextual design issues. We've just found that is hard to come across because every municipality is different. Every neighborhood, even within a city, is a little bit different. And the clients are all different. So it makes for very interesting approaches to a project that is essentially, a one-bedroom apartment, one-bedroom accessory dwelling unit, but there are so many factors that go into each one that make each one unique.
Yeah, if I could add to that, South Portland in particular has a lot of different neighborhoods and a lot of different lot sizes, and setbacks vary drastically between one end of SoPo and the other. And we have one of the more constrained lots. I think we were right, like Meeting House Hill area. But yeah, even in South Portland alone, the zoning and the ADU language isn't even a one size fits all in the city. Like it almost needs kind of a neighborhood specific. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole, but I cannot agree more.
Yeah, I keep thinking of that diagram being an unconventional kind of a project. In general, ADUs are just like, you have time, you have resources and money. If you have a little less of one, you pull on a little more of another. And that could be, a prefab plop and drop kind of a thing, a trailer without wheels that probably meets somebody's needs. But on the other hand, I think that in general, most of the projects we've seen today, building them isn't the hard part. And the hard part about designing them is figuring out how to skirt the restrictions and meet the requirements in the same way.
Would anyone like to ask questions from our group of attendees? I'm calling on all of you. You can either type in your question or you can ask.
Does anybody have a better name for an accessory dwelling unit?
Ah, that's a good one. For AD.
Not a tiny house.
Yeah, tiny house. So that's an interesting point. Like, you know, the tiny house movement, I guess, is probably a subset of you know what an ADU is, but it's not totally. Like, if you think about it, we've seen some 1,200 square foot ADUs today, at least in my presentation, and a tiny house by definition is less than 600. And then like the ranch houses that you know our parents and grandparents bought in the 50s and 60s, those were 8 to 1,200 square feet too. So tiny is pretty relative. But it is a catchier name, I'll give you that.
Or the in-law that Jean-Michel wrote.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what we all grew up with, you know, before that moniker. I mean, this,
Mhm.
it is policy speech when you think of it. I mean, everybody in policy loves an acronym. So this just happens to be a bit, yeah, a sidekick actually. Ooh, that one's a good one. Great. This was awesome. And again, I'm exceptionally respectful of people's time. If anyone really does want to come into the conversation, please feel free. But I'm also not going to recite crib. Oh, that one's good too, Kathy. Yeah, but I'm really looking forward to, so this week we talked more about the residential and we didn't really get into, I mean, you got into the cost a bit, but the financing is our last series where we actually have someone from Georgia who's going to talk about just different financing options. And then next week we have Roseanne Haggerty, who was a speaker for PSA earlier in 2020, speaking about the houseless community. And Jess Valero from the People's Housing Coalition will be here as well, talking about what opportunities there are for working with the homeless. And there's some programs and subsidies and incentives for doing some project. Someone's asking if our utilities are separate. It really depends on your site and what's asked. I believe in Portland, it is required that they are separate, that you can't just tee into them, which is a big cost hurdle. Yes, I like that, Jesse Thompson, for your prefab home bright built. Yes, anyone who wants to plug, by all means, put in the contact. Likely in more of our material for the design competition, we do have a resource page, and we will, you know, highlight these projects as well as who's out there and what they're doing. There are a number of prefab companies in Maine. There's even someone who is coming up from Massachusetts who is working on just ADUs. And then there's a group in New Hampshire as well that's been doing this. So these are their side projects. Great. And yeah, this was excellent. I'm really grateful. And thank you. Does anyone else want to say anything?
I see a question about the overly limiting ordinance bit. I guess for me, the requirement, again, at the time was 2 extra cars need to be able to be parked on
Yeah.
the property. And I think an overall goal here is to increase density, but also, you know, decrease traffic. That it seemed counterintuitive to me. So if there's a way, and the detached, I get that. And I think it's very wise, obviously, to have the owner need to live in one of either the ADU or the primary, because that keeps the neighborhood, you know, fabric, for lack of a better term, intact. But yeah, the car thing was the biggie for me.
Alyssa has a great question. Do you see this as a helpful solution to addressing housing in Portland? This is a big question, actually. So some planners, well, I'm not going to answer, actually. I'll let you guys answer.
I think what's interesting about ADUs is they're like a very sort of natural diagram of, or they can be, not always, but a diagram of socioeconomic diversity and other kinds of diversity, which I think, you know, that's under threat in Portland when the average home sale is like, what, 420 grand now? Not a lot of, that's not socioeconomic diversity. So I think ADUs are one solution in that picture. I think they're one part of that solution for sure, if we can do it right.
any other ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a major, housing issue in Portland, so you need more housing. So any ways to create it are I think good. And I do think that there are ways. I know there's fear of density in certain neighborhoods, but there are kind of methodical and intelligent ways to incorporate more housing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You might not even notice it, but like Chris mentioned, you're getting more housing, you're getting more diversity. And it's a good thing. So
Yeah.
Joanna,
Well,
Joanna, oh, sorry, Bill. Go ahead,
yeah,
Bill.
just a quick comment from Peaks Island. I'm on an organization called Homestart at Peaks Island, and we have been looking at ADUs as a way, whatever we can do to encourage more affordable housing on Peaks Island, which believe me is a big challenge, but interesting. We have one ADU on planned for construction during this year.
Joanna asked that I referenced the Los Angeles' pre-approval model, and is there a path for easing or reinventing that approval process locally, which is a big question. This has been asked a few times. I know Julia Tate is on this call. She and Patrick Booth have been facilitating our Mechanics of the Built Environment programs, where we invite city staff to talk about policy change, the recode, et cetera. And this has been brought up. Our design competition is actually a start of that, because basically when you look at all the varied lot sizes, and the city has been very generous in giving us their GIS files to look at every single parcel. It will be really curious to see how designers respond to a challenge and push the limits. And then really what we do after it is the big challenge, I think, for PSA, as well as the design community. Would we in fact pick that up and take that on to lobby as policy, that there could be these a broad portfolio of pre-approved, or at least pre-approved architects and companies that could be able to do this. So we're just starting this conversation. And I'll just say that there are some planners that, I was going to say this earlier, that really think that too much emphasis is being placed on ADUs, that it's such a small percentage of what could potentially be done. But I think that that's a little heavy-handed and maybe too missing an opportunity. So I think we're just approaching this. We know it's not solving all the problems, but it is an incremental increase in density, which is actually pretty exciting. So yeah.
And Addie, I think your
Oh,
reference of
great.
Los Angeles, I'm here. I think your reference to Los Angeles is really interesting, because over the years, they've certainly piloted quite a number of programs to understand land use and affordable housing, and even like the backyard homes project, in which they worked specifically with a number of architects to sort of develop particular models, but hoping that that would evolve over time. And part of that was really making it user-friendly for people. And in a way, it's somewhat like editing architects out of the process to some degree. And I think that becomes a really interesting conversation on its own, like to what ability are you able to empower people to make really great decisions for the built environment, and how kind of ready to go can that be? But I think they are interesting lessons to learn from, to see what other cities have done as they've grown and met some of these challenges.
And actually, Andrew and Chris presented on LA as well. So Andrew did 2 projects in LA, and Chris was speaking to the rules and regulations really in the start. So I don't know if you caught that, but
I missed that piece.
It's okay, it's totally fine. I'm not putting you on. I'm not purposely putting you on. But I can't take the credit for bringing Los Angeles into the discussion by any stretch.
Yeah.
I'd like to give you more credit.
I'm glad it was a shared credit.
Yeah, I think I love that we have a place to point to where ADUs appear to be really working, like in real time. I'm sad that it's all the way over in Los Angeles, but what you were saying about architects in the process, Joanna, I think there's like, even beyond just prefab, even beyond plop and drop. I mean, this is such a nuanced sort of process, getting an ADU built, apparently, in most places, that I think there's all sorts of opportunities for different modes of practice that could grow up to meet this demand.
That's an excellent.
I don't know if I joined late, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm in DC, and ADUs has been a new trend for the past 3 years. And we have a culture of the English basement here. And what's happening now is that the English basement is turning into an ADU because it's 1/3 of the overall living area you have available, and you have the same limitation than I could see in Portland when I joined. So that's what's happening. But we enter into an issue where a developer labeled a lower unit ADU, and after turning into condos, and now they establish a piece of paper making that the owner has to sign saying that it will always stay a single family. And I was wondering if you had that same situation wherever you guys are working.
I can say that we have a unique situation in Portland where currently I believe that an ADU and one other unit on the same property need to be held in common ownership. And the owner who develops the ADU needs to live on the site until the point of sale, I believe. So if that makes no sense, don't blame me. I mean, I think it's clear enough, but it's different everywhere. And that's one thing I wonder about Vancouver. I know they also have a large part-time population, and I wonder if their ADUs can be utilized there. I'll look it up for later, for next time. But that's a really good question. That depends whether these work for good or for not so good. Maybe hinges on that question of ownership and tenure. Who can live?
And don't get me wrong, I think ownership, like having the same owner, makes a lot of sense, and not being able to split the ownership after makes a lot of sense, because in DC, the requirement in terms of like fireproofing and so on between an ADU and a upper unit or two different units is so different. Like the fireproofing is different. They assume you're a one family unit with just your in-laws living downstairs, renting the place. And so what happened is the city reacted really well because that was not in place at the beginning. I personally was one of the first to build my own ADU in my basement, and didn't have to sign any paper. It was just written that I need to leave on site to rent the place. That's it. But developer took that and run with it, and the city had some issues, and they react really fast. And I think it's a good thing. I think trying to be smart with the code is what we do on a daily basis, but at some point we need to think about the occupants. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, well, our exciting challenge is to figure out like what that typology is here. Do we have something like an English basement in Portland, something that we can capitalize on to, make this work? Or, maybe it's a more diverse sort of set of solutions. But we get to figure it out. We have a cool new ADU ordinance. We have to test drive it. So sign up for our competition when we announce it.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this. It really is a test. I love that phrasing. It's a test drive. It's how do you visualize this and push the boundaries? And, we had a conversation with an economist earlier this week who basically said, in order for your numbers to really fit, you need at least 3 bedrooms. So now all of a sudden you apply that. I think, Greg, your funding strategy was a really unique, exceptionally unique, but it was also rather complicated in having the timing match, but not everybody has that equity to be able to do that. So and that's what John will speak about a little bit, sort of some creative financing, but really the pro forma, what do you give up to gain? And how will that work for people that don't normally do this? Developers can play and mix and match, but really these are intended for, right, the way Portland designed it was it's intended for homeowners to be able to increase some of their, to decrease some of their spending with this unit and to supplement their mortgage. So not if it's cost prohibitive. So there are all these fascinating, delicious pieces to untangle. And so someone had asked, where's the competition? The competition is being worked on right now, final tweaks. This is the series to basically kick off the discussion to get people excited and jazzed, and it will be released and it will be public, and it will hope go viral. I mean, our last competition, we got submissions from across the globe, which was great. And so it'll be fun to see how people might interpret our policy from another continent and challenge it. But we're hoping to locally that everyone here will really push it. And to your point, Joanna, hopefully we have more conversations about what could be done, with a portfolio or a kit, or, you know, what that means. So yeah, really grateful to all three of you for your afternoon. Thank you so much. This will be put up on our YouTube channel probably by the end of today, so you can rewatch it over and over again. And again, the next event is next Friday at noon. So this coming next Friday and the Friday after. And so thank you so much. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.